John was a maverick, and he said he picked me because in many ways I'm wired the same. So early in the campaign, I called Bob and Mark, talk radio hosts on KWHL in Anchorage. We used to call each other often, along with another great host, Eddie Burke, on a rival station, KBYR, when I had some state news to announce or when they had a hot topic to bounce around on their shows. I had always had a fine relationship with the state and local media. They could call me up and within 5 minutes be up in my office to talk about any topic. Many reporters had my personal cell phone number, and I had theirs. That's the way we operated. It helped us govern. So as the campaign bus barreled down a freeway somewhere in the middle of America, I punched up KWHL on speed dial. "Hey, Bob, it's Sarah." "Governor," Bob said. "Good to hear from you, finally." "Hey, I wanted to touch base, and I've got a true American hero sitting right here with me, and you should feel honored to hear him say hello. I'm going to put him on the line so he can say hi to Alaska." So I handed John the phone, and he was very funny and gracious and engaged in an upbeat, informative interview with KWEL and a whole lot of constituents. Afterward, one of the campaign higher-ups told our staff, "Don't ever let her do that again." Oops. It was a treat for Alaskans to hear from their governor's friend, the top of the GOP ticket. But I suppose my handing John the phone with a radio host on the other end could be considered breaking proper protocol. Since people did that to me all through my time in public office, it didn't seem particularly improper, especially for a man whose campaign bus was called the Straight Talk Express. That's what John was known for, giving the press incredible access and allowing them to ask him any question at any time. I suspect it wasn't that big a deal to John at all, but the lectures from on high began about my talking to the media, especially Alaska media. I told the campaign staff that part of my job as governor would be keeping in touch with my constituents via local media contacts. "Alaska has 3 electoral votes," Schmidt told me. "You don't need to contact the Alaska media again." I would learn that this was typical of Schmidt. This was business, and I respected that aspect of his personality. Not a lot of camaraderie or rah-rah optimism, and that describes most others in the professional political cast. I was focused on meeting constituents every minute of the day and conducting state of Alaska business, so I didn't pay much attention to what the paid operatives were doing and orchestrating. But I did notice that there was a jaded aura about some of them, funny things that even Piper commented on, such as tumbling out of the bus in a pack, lighting cigarettes as they went so it looked like a walking smoke cloud with legs. My Alaska spokeswoman, Megan Stapleton, kept pushing for official campaign permission to grant interviews to the reporters I'd been talking to at least weekly for years. Recognized for intelligence and hard work and political acumen, Meg had a huge following from her days on the air in Anchorage, and I had never met anyone like her. She had worked in my governor's office, so she knew my top priority was continuing to communicate with my constituents even during the national campaign. She noted that an Alaska station was willing to spend whatever it took on a trip to Minnesota so a local reporter could report on the VP candidacy. Meg kept trying to negotiate with the campaign staff. She pleaded with headquarters to let me answer just 3 questions for the guy. How do you feel? What is it like? What's your message to Alaskans? Not only was this guy a decent person whom we knew well, but these were simple, softball, scripted questions. It was tough for her, even as my Alaska spokesperson, to get in touch with the VP of the campaign. But when we finally connected, the answer came back from headquarters. No, not allowed. Too dangerous. The national media might pick up the interview. Well, exactly, we thought. Wasn't that okay? Meg and I agreed that the better strategy would be to let the national media pick up information about me from journalists who knew me and had been reporting on me for years. Maybe that would help counter the negative spin of so many other stories. It was not to be. As the weeks wore on, Meg kept reaching out to the McCain people, but she couldn't get anywhere close. Ultimately, this hurt the campaign to a degree the experts could never grasp. By that time, people from across the country were busily inventing reasons to label us unethical. And slowly but surely, the Alaska press decided that I was ignoring them and maybe thinking I'd grown too big for my britches. By the third week in September, a Free Sarah campaign was underway, and the press at large was growing increasingly critical of the McCain camp's decision to keep me, my family, and friends back home, and my governor's staff all bottled up. Meanwhile, the question of which news outlet would land the first interview was a big deal, as it always is with a major party candidate. From the beginning, one of the campaign advisors assigned to me, Nicole Wallace, pushed for Katie Couric in the CBS Evening News. The campaign's general strategy involved coming out with a network anchor, someone they felt had treated John well on the trail thus far. My suggestion was that we be consistent with that strategy and start talking to outlets like Fox and the Wall Street Journal. I really didn't have a say in which press I was going to talk to, but for some reason Nicole seemed compelled to get me on the Katie bandwagon. "Katie really likes you," she said to me one day. "She's a working mom and admires you as a working mom. She has teenage daughters like you. She just relates to you," Nicole said. "Believe me, I know her very well. I've worked with her." Nicole had left her gig at CBS just a few months earlier to hook up with the McCain campaign. I had to trust her experience, as she had dealt with national politics more than I had. But something always struck me as peculiar about the way she recalled her days in the White House when she was speaking on behalf of President George W. Bush. She didn't have much to say that was positive about her former boss or the job in general. Whenever I wanted to give a shout-out to the White House's Homeland Security efforts after 9/11, we were told we couldn't do it. I didn't know if that was Nicole's call. Nicole went on to explain that Katie really needed a career boost. "She just has such low self-esteem," Nicole said. She added that Katie was going through a tough time. "She just feels she can't trust anybody." I was thinking, and this has to do with John McCain's campaign, how? "Katie wants people to like her," Nicole said. "She wants you to like her." Hearing all that, I almost started to feel sorry for her. Katie had tried to make a bold move from lively morning gal to serious anchor, but the new assignment wasn't going very well. "You know what? We'll schedule a segment with her," Nicole said. "If it doesn't go well, if there's no chemistry, we won't do any others." Meanwhile, the media blackout continued. In my quest to connect with reporters, I did find that I had a tiny little press ambassador, and her name was Piper Palin. The reporters loved her, and whenever they would pass her seat on the plane, they'd ask how she was doing. At first she was a little shy, but as days passed and reporters' friendly faces grew more familiar, she started asking if she could go back and visit with them. One day, Jason took an orange and wrote on it, "Hi, how are you?" from Piper Palin. Then he rolled it down the aisle to where the press was sitting. One of the reporters picked it up, inked a reply on the orange, and rolled it back. "Come visit us, please." Jason showed it to me, and I said, "Of course." So Piper and Willow both went back with my staffer, Tracy Schmidt, and introduced themselves. After that, it became a bit of a routine that the kids would go back and chit-chat with the press. From where I was sitting, it seemed like a win-win. The kids enjoyed getting to know new people, and the reporters got to be around at least two smiling, unguarded human beings who weren't stressed out and suspicious all the time. Sometime early in the campaign, Piper must have asked someone if they could print up special stickers with hearts on them. They did, and then whenever we'd get a new batch of reporters on the plane, she would go back and pass out stickers that said, "Vote for Piper's mom." On September 17th, John and I held a joint town hall session in Michigan at the Grand Rapids Community College Ford Fieldhouse. John was in his element, with such an easy way of connecting with a Main Street audience. He was witty, charming, and in complete command of the issues. I was excited to participate in this format for the first time during the national campaign. Town hall meetings are my comfort zone, too, and were one of the keys to my administration's success on energy issues in Alaska. Just get out and talk to the people. I was eager for more of them, hoping to campaign in ways my experience had shown me was most effective, instead of the orchestrated events the campaign operatives wanted to put us through. I wound up with a personal connection in Grand Rapids, the Holmes family, the gracious and patient host whom Track had stayed with while playing hockey in Michigan during the 2006 season. It was a chance to give them a hug and tell them how much Todd and I appreciated their kindness to our son. On a larger scale, I felt the Holmes family represented the kind of people our ticket could resonate with in a state filled with hard-working, patriotic Americans, hockey moms, union members, and veterans. Obama was leading by double digits there, but the Grand Rapids meeting gave me hope that we could bounce back and turn the state around. I got to tell Michigan, thank you for taking care of my son. Now he's taking care of you. Todd and I were sitting in a Michigan hotel room where the campaign staffers were enjoying an emotional lift from the town hall meeting when Schmidt, flanked by security personnel, walked in, grim-faced, and announced that he had something important to discuss. I had just seen on TV a sickening report that my personal emails had been hacked into, and I figured that's what he wanted to talk about. A cold hand squeezed my heart, though, as I wondered if something else had happened with the kids back in Alaska. Bristol had been reporting strange vehicles creeping up and down our long gravel driveway. Secret Service agents had just stopped a local reporter-photographer team sneaking through the bushes toward our house. Reporters had taken to camping out near our family members' homes. Had one of them crossed the line between reporting and invading privacy? That was partially right. Your personal emails have been hacked, Schmidt confirmed. The hacker is broadcasting your personal emails on the internet right now, and photos, too. And it wasn't just Todd's and my emails. It was the kids', too, and personal contact information. This came on the heels of my social security number and other private information being broadcast. It was another fine, how do you do? Hi, Governor, welcome to the blood sport known as presidential politics. The TV was on in the background. We could see on a news channel the contents of my private correspondence scrolling across the screen. The network showed the to and from fields, thus making my family's and friends' private email addresses visible to the world. Recognizing one of the names that flashed in front of me, I was horrified to realize that millions of people could read my personal messages, including the thoughts of a friend who had written of her heartbreak over her pending divorce. My mind raced to other messages I knew were stored in one of my email accounts, Bristol and I discussing her pregnancy, Todd and I discussing Trigg's medical challenges, my farewell prayer and encouragement before Track's deployment, me telling Willow that no, she absolutely could not get a ride home with a high school boy. All kinds of sensitive discussions, including political ones, the kind of unguarded talk you have only with the people who are closest to you and don't take what you say out of context. Obviously, our discussions weren't meant for public display, but because I had no home-based headquarters, my emails were my campaign headquarters. As I watched message after message float across the screen, I thought, what kind of creep would break into a person's files, steal them, read them, and then give them to the press to broadcast all over the world in order to influence a presidential campaign? And what kind of responsible press outfit would broadcast stolen correspondence? Standing beside Schmidt was Tony Ball, a patient soul wrapped in a tough, muscle-bound Secret Service agent body. Even as I was staring at the screen, he was already on the phone working with the FBI. It didn't take long for the feds to identify the source, a college student who was the son of a Democrat Tennessee state legislator. The excuses made for this invasion of privacy were disgusting and nonsensical. Sarah Palin is a public figure, the spin went. She should expect this kind of thing, and if she's worried about it, what is she trying to hide? We had to cancel all of our email accounts. My friends' and family's personal and business accounts had to be changed too, as they'd all been compromised. And once again, the campaign confiscated the kids' phones. The incident was, to me, the most disruptive and discouraging of the campaign. It created paralysis in my administration because it cut off an easily accessible form of communication between me and my Alaska staff. Worse, I could no longer contact my kids, even Track, who would shortly leave for Iraq. Also, thanks to the hackers disclosing all of our contact information, the kids began receiving vulgar email threats and phone calls, which scared me for all of them. It was all sickening. The incident put tremendous stress on the campaign. Schmidt and others acted as though they believed scattered reports that my hacked email contained incriminating messages that would destroy the McCain campaign. There were no such messages, of course, but the episode ratcheted up paranoia and distrust inside the campaign. The hacker later admitted he was looking for something damaging. It reminded many of us of a modern-day break-in of campaign headquarters. The nationwide momentum that was building didn't become clear to me until we stopped at the Villages near Lady Lake, Florida, one of the largest retirement communities in the United States. The Villages is like a city unto itself, with restaurants, lakes, and shopping and golf courses. The residents there are very politically aware and active, so the community has become a must-stop stomping ground for politicians in the Sunshine State, especially for the GOP. Florida seniors tend to vote Republican. The place is also famous for golf carts. Instead of getting around in cars, most residents tootle around in carts decorated and jacked up to fit the owner's personality. My family and I had never seen anything like this and thought it was the Florida version of Alaskans congregating with their boats or snow machines. The morning of our event, my staffers, Jason Recker and Doug McMarlin, the campaign's advance guy in Florida, drove to the venue to take a quick look at the setup. "How many people do you think we'll get?" Jason asked. "Probably 10 or 12,000, Doug replied. Jason was satisfied. That was a great number for a vice presidential candidate. A few hours later, he joined us on the bus as the whole crew headed down to the Villages for the rally. About an hour and a half before the event, Jason called Doug again. "How many people do we have now?" Jason shared the number with the rest of us. 15,000. 20 minutes later, he called Doug again. "Wow," I heard him say. The crowd had doubled to 30,000. "Wow," I said myself. Something big was happening. When the bus reached the edge of the retirement community, all I could see were golf carts. It seemed like miles and miles of them lined up alongside the road. As we drove on, I could see and feel momentum building, energy radiating from the growing crowd of patriotic Americans who had gathered because they wanted to be involved. As we got closer to the venue, the strings of golf carts became a sea of golf carts, double and triple parked, bumper to bumper on the sidewalks, security teams with flags waving long chains of carts into makeshift parking areas. When I stepped off the bus at a Villages community center, humidity dropped over me like a hot, wet blanket. We trailed Jason into the community center where we found Doug. "How many people now?" Jason said. Doug, an experienced campaign advance man, shook his head in wonder. "Fire marshal saying 50 to 60,000 people." Jason's jaw dropped and his eyes grew wide, and I was a little surprised myself. Obama had drawn a couple of similar-sized crowds to this point, but the McCain campaign had previously been averaging only a few thousand people. This was a rock concert-sized crowd. Some football stadiums don't hold that many people. What was going on? The advance team had set up a walkway that led from the center's door out to the stage. Jason opened the door to take a peek, and a huge, overwhelming roar crashed in like an ocean wave. Jason quickly let the door swing shut. "Wow, this is going to be a blast," I said. "I can't wait to meet these folks." Then Piper chimed in. "I want to say something." So Jason grabbed a handheld mic to take out on stage. At go time, he opened the door, and another tidal wave of sound rushed in. I looked out at the sea of people, so large and stunning that I had nothing to compare it to. We walked out, and with all the handshaking on the way, it took at least 10 minutes to make our way to the stage. I had by that time been doing public speaking for going on 2 decades, but the only time I'd ever seen a crowd this large, even as a spectator, was at a Broncos-Seahawks game in Seattle 20 years before. When we finally reached the stage, I just wanted a moment to take it all in, so I looked for a momentary savior, and there she was, standing 4'6". "Piper, do you have something to say to the nice people of Florida?" She grinned and waved and took the mic, and then she said, with a last-minute flush of shyness, "Thank you for letting us be here." And that was exactly how I felt. I gave my speech with my face sliding off in the Sunshine State's humidity and 90-degree heat. Then the kids and I worked the rope line, grinning the entire time. It was overwhelming. It took us an hour and a half to make our way through all the people. In the campaign's opinion, that was way too long. In one way, I understood because there were a lot of events each day and a schedule to keep. On the other hand, tens of thousands of everyday Americans had waited for hours in steaming tropical heat to share their day with us. Women shouted out, "My husband's in Iraq." I knew how they felt. "I have a special needs granddaughter." I wanted to hug that grandma. "I want to stay in business," a guy in coveralls hollered. "I skipped school to see you guys," one kid called out. I playfully scolded him, then gave him a big thumbs up. Oil workers, school teachers, home builders, homemakers, doctors, truck drivers, waitresses, police officers. How could I just blow by? I couldn't, so I didn't. Instead, I zigzagged back and forth, shaking hands and signing everything in sight. It drove the Secret Service a little crazy, but I wasn't worried about an assassination attempt on Sarah Palin from Wasilla. I felt the least we could do was spend some time really connecting with voters, promoting John McCain's values and commitment, showing our appreciation for all of them, not just whisking through and dashing off a couple of autographs like Hollywood celebrities on a red carpet. We owed them. After the rope line, the agents and staffers hustled us onto the bus, and it was just incredible to see. As we were driving out, people lined both sides of the street for miles, waving and shouting, holding up U.S. flags and lipstick tubes. Hundreds of golf carts followed the bus, honking their support. The kids were whooping and hollering on the bus because they'd never had so much fun. In selecting the slogan, Country First, the McCain team had hoped to make national security the central theme of the campaign and differentiate itself from what sounded like the other side's Blame America First impulse. This seemed especially important after Michelle Obama's statement during the Democrat primary in February 2008 that she felt proud of her country for the first time in her adult lifetime. To me, that was an incomprehensible statement. The campaign also hoped to position John, a legitimate war hero, as the best candidate to lead a nation currently fighting 2 wars. But even with our American troops still dying abroad, by early September, the nation's financial meltdown had pushed Iraq and Afghanistan below the fold. The housing market was already in the tank, with the number of foreclosures hitting record highs. Major financial giants had declared bankruptcy earlier in the year, sending shockwaves through the markets. Then, on September 7th, the Fed seized control of the mortgage lenders Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. A week later, the Wall Street heavyweight Lehman Brothers collapsed. In the same week, news broke that the insurance giant AIG was on the verge of bankruptcy. John briefly suspended his campaign in order to attend an emergency economic summit in Washington. The VP, half of the ticket, didn't know the strategy on that one. Most of us heard the announcement in the news. There was initially some doubt as to whether the first presidential debate would even go on as scheduled. So we scrambled to make plans either to take John's place at his scheduled events or to travel back to Alaska to catch up on my gubernatorial duties. But it soon became obvious that there were no quick fixes to the economic crash, and the campaign resumed the next day. It was an odd strategic call on someone's part, but we all learned lessons along the trail. The debate went on as planned, and John did great. The post-game analysis in the media, though, was that the cool-headed Obama had won the night, displaying a firm grasp of the facts, while John, they tried to convince voters, had seemed irritable and condescending. Granted, 90% of the news people covering the debate were liberal. 3 days later, the House of Representatives rejected a Bush-backed economic bailout plan in a vote in which 2/3 of Republicans voted no. The impression this made on the electorate was not helpful to our cause. Millions of Americans were poised to go bankrupt or lose their savings, and the perception was that Republicans had failed to respond. On September 24th, the day John announced he was setting politics aside to deal with the financial crisis, we were 4 points ahead in the polls. By September 29th, the day of the bailout vote, we had fallen behind. That bracket of time also included my seemingly endless serial chat with the lowest-rated news anchor in network television, CBS's Katie Couric. If all you know of me comes from that interview, then you don't know me. Needless to say, I have had better interviews. Out of the many, many hours of tape, I had bad moments just like everyone else. I choked on a couple of responses, and in the harried pace of the campaign, I mistakenly let myself become annoyed and frustrated with many of her repetitive, biased questions. What I didn't know was that those few moments would come to define the interviews. They were repeated and mocked so often that everything else has seemingly been forgotten. And that is unfortunate. The campaign scheduled Katie during the last week in September. The prep was minimal. The team of people who usually hustled information before these types of things wasn't very involved in this one. But I was told this was to be a pretty mellow interview, short and sweet, about balancing motherhood and my life as governor. I was also led to believe this interview would be the only one, but if things went well, we could consider adding more. The first stop was a segment at a hotel near the United Nations, which we turned into a walk and talk in front of the UN itself. It didn't go well. I readily admit I did what no politician should ever do, let her annoyance show. I was anxious to get this interview over with, and you could tell, which was my mistake. Ironically, as all of this was going through my head when the walk and talk ended and the cameras clicked off, one of the CBS producers, a nice New Yorker with a big presence and a loud voice, walked up to me and started singing my praises. "You did great, Governor, just great. I mean, you just got better and better as you went." Then my advisor, Nicole Wallace, walked over. "That was great. Now, for tomorrow, what we're going to do..." "There's going to be a tomorrow?" I asked. "Yeah, there's another segment. You were really good today." I thought, dear Lord, if that's what you call a good interview, then I don't know what a bad one is. As I walked away, I glanced back and saw Nicole and Katie share a friendly hug. Then they posed for pictures. I couldn't have known it then, but what transpired during the series of interviews and what CBS actually aired were two different breeds of cat. Camera crews shot hours of footage across the U.S. Katie and her producers decided on which fraction America would see. And let's just say the emphasis was on my worst moments. Editing footage is nothing new, of course. I created video packages when I worked as a sports reporter, but responsible editing means you keep substance and context and trim out fat. When I saw the final cut, it was clear that CBS had sought out the bad moments and systematically sliced out material that would accurately convey my message. The sin of omission was glaring. For example, when John and I sat down with Katie for a segment in Columbus, Ohio, we started with an energy-related question. "Governor Palin, it will take about 10 years for domestic drilling to have an impact on consumers," the anchor said. "So isn't the notion of drill, baby, drill a little misleading to people who think this will automatically lower their gas prices and quickly?" I said, "And that's why we should have started 10 years ago tapping into domestic supplies that America is so rich in. Alaska has billions of barrels of oil and hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of clean, green, natural gas, onshore and offshore. Should have started doing it 10 years ago, but better late than never." That's the part CBS left in. They edited out a discussion of the need to wean ourselves off hydrocarbons and a call for America to stop spending billions of dollars on foreign oil when we could be investing it at home. Did Katie think Americans wouldn't be interested to know that I was in favor of alternative energy sources and reducing our carbon footprint? Or that I might be a conservative who was both pro-development and pro-environment? Perhaps my answer didn't fit her agenda. Katie then moved on to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR. "Experts say it will take almost 20 years to achieve peak production," she said, "and it would still only cut foreign oil dependency by about 2% and only for a little while, so is it really worth the risk?" I replied that I didn't know which experts those were, but I explained that as the chair of the Alaska Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, I knew from geologists and petroleum engineers with whom I had worked that it could be done a lot quicker. I also pointed out that ANWR is a 2,000-acre plot that's in the midst of 21 million acres. Americans needed to know how unconscionable it is that anti-development radicals use ANWR as their fundraising poster child. They use bogus Photoshop pictures showing mountains and waterfalls and lush forests with Bambi prancing to and fro. That's all fake, and these fundraisers know it. It is an absolutely barren, permanently frozen, remote sliver of land that requires a minimal drilling footprint, and its development parameters are equivalent to the size of LA's airport. But neither Katie's question nor my answer wound up on the air. I knew the media would distort my responses on social issues, but I thought surely they couldn't distort my economic and energy-related responses because they would have to stick with the facts. I was mistaken. Though Katie edited out substantial answers, she dutifully kept in the moments where I wore my annoyance on my sleeve. For instance, when she asked me how living in Alaska informed my foreign policy experience, I began by trying to frame the geographical context. Lower 48ers grow up seeing our state tucked with Hawaii in a little square off the coast of Mexico on the nightly news weather map. So I began by trying to squeeze a geographical primer into a 10-second soundbite, explaining that only a narrow maritime border separates Alaska from Russia, and we're very near the Pacific Rim countries, and that we're bordered by Canada. But Katie interrupted, and I did not complete my answer. I wish now I had stopped her and said, "Here's the geographical context. Now, may I answer your question?" There was so much I could and should have said, and I later kicked myself for not doing so. There was much Katie appeared not to know or care to hear about. For instance, that Alaska's geographic position makes our relations with Pacific Rim countries of great strategic import, and that we're the air crossroads of the world, that Russian bombers often play cat and mouse with our Air Force near Alaska's airspace, that I dealt with Canadian officials on a weekly basis and have signed agreements concerning everything from security to salmon fishing, and that NAFTA has significantly affected our economy, that melting polar sea ice has created new trade routes, but has also created security threats to North America, that Alaska takes on Japanese and Russian fishing trawlers that want to ravage the ocean floor, that Chinese and Russian energy companies had both sought access to and possible control of our natural gas resources, that these and other countries were staking their own resource claims in Arctic waters while the U.S. sat on its hands, and that, yes, you can indeed see Russia from Alaska. And those were just the foreign policy issues, though issues certainly foreign to most governors. How much more I would have liked to say about Alaska's contribution to the U.S. economy, its potential to help the nation reduce its dependence on foreign energy sources, and the delicate balancing act required to manage and responsibly develop our abundant wildlife resources. But Katie wasn't interested in discussing these issues, and when I did, she didn't air them. Instead, when I tried to describe frequent Russian incursions by figuratively referring to Vladimir Putin entering our airspace, CBS researched the Russian leader's actual flight plan over the United States and called my statement inaccurate. And when I referenced Alaska's narrow maritime border to describe our close proximity to other nations, CBS reported that the Coast Guard monitored the border and not the governor. But Katie's purpose, shared by most media types, seemed to be to frame a gotcha moment. And it worked. Instead of my scoring points for John McCain, I knew that I had let the team down. You'd have thought the ordeal would have been over then. Nope, there would be more. The next interview segment would take place backstage immediately after I finished speaking at an inspiring, raucous rally and working a packed rope line. We were over the top energized. We were pumped. I was also sweating like crazy and ready for a minute to breathe and drink an icy Diet Dr. Pepper. But when I finished with the rope line and my assistant, Bexy Nobles, opened the curtain to let me backstage, there was Katie, again, with microphone in hand. I tried really hard to smile, but wondered again about a media strategy that involved ignoring objective journalists and continuing with a reporter who clearly had a partisan agenda. In a situation like this, I'd have thought expert political strategists would realize that you don't drown by falling in the water, you drown by staying there, but that's what we did. Katie began her walk and talk. "When it comes to establishing your worldview," she asked with a cock of her head, "I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?" Trying to ignore the heavy dose of condescension, I replied matter-of-factly, "I've read most of them, again with a great appreciation for the press." "What ones specifically? I'm curious." "All of them, any of them that have been in front of me all these years." It wasn't that I didn't want to, or as some have ludicrously suggested, couldn't answer her question. It was that her condescension irritated me. It was as though she had suddenly stumbled on a primitive newcomer from an undiscovered tribe, but I should not have let my irritation show. Doing so was disrespectful to viewers who had tuned in to the interview to decide how to cast their votes. She asked me a third time, and I told her that I got my news from a variety of sources. Over the past several months, I had been interviewed on energy and security issues by numerous national media outlets, including her hometown newspaper, the New York Times, for whom I had also penned an op-ed earlier in the year on another issue, Had she read those, I wondered? This interview ended only to immediately give way to another segment, this time on the campaign bus. Nicole had said we wouldn't spend more time with this crew if things weren't going well, and I knew that moment had long passed. How was this moving our campaign forward? On the bus, the topic turned to social issues. Katie asked me if I thought it was possible to pray away gay, to convert homosexuals to heterosexuality through prayer. I thought, odd question. I don't think she really wanted to hear my answer because she interrupted me 5 times as I tried to give it. The badgering had begun. This is really annoying me, I thought. Then she asked me about abortion and the morning after pill 12 times, 12 different times. I answered as graciously and as patiently as I could. Each time I reiterated my pro-life, pro-woman, pro-adoption position, but no matter how many ways I tried to say it, Katie responded by asking her question again in a slightly different way. I began to feel like I was in the movie Groundhog Day. The line of questioning began, of course, with an extreme, horrific example. If a 15-year-old is raped by her father, you believe it should be illegal for her to get an abortion. Why? I answered there were good people on both sides of the abortion debate and that I was unapologetically pro-life and that I would counsel someone to choose life. I also said that we should build a culture of life in which we help women in difficult situations, encourage adoption, and support foster and adoptive families. Katie jumped in. But ideally, you think it should be illegal for a girl who was raped or the victim of incest to get an abortion. I answered again. I would personally counsel such a girl to choose life despite these horrific circumstances, but I absolutely didn't think anyone should end up in jail for having an abortion. Katie included that, but didn't include another important part of my answer, that we should support women in these difficult circumstances and give them the resources necessary to give their children life. And that the real extremism came from those who supported partial birth abortion, those who didn't believe parents should have a say in whether their minor daughters underwent abortions, and those, like Barack Obama, who opposed laws that would protect babies born alive after botched abortions. But that wasn't enough. Katie asked it again, and again, and again. I had been out of journalism for a long time, and it was pretty obvious the rules had changed. I felt sick about the depths to which some in the press had apparently sunk, not because it was unfair to me and John, but because it was unfair to the American electorate. Afterward, a staffer noted that Katie had been much more forgiving during an interview with Joe Biden around the same time, not even asking a follow-up question when Biden let loose with a real clunker. He said, when the stock market crashed, Franklin D. Roosevelt got on the television and didn't just talk about, the princes of greed. He said, look, here's what happened. Of course, FDR wasn't president in 1929, and television had barely been invented. There were no White House broadcasts in those days. But Katie never pointed out these glaring historical errors. Instead, the soundbite aired as a factual statement and was used to denounce Bush's handling of the economy. Still, my biggest disappointment wasn't the badgering or even the selective editing. It was that the interviews ended up wasting time. There were any number of productive things I could have been doing instead, meeting with constituents, greeting the thousands of good Americans who waited in sweltering lines and stuffy hangars to hear from us, or speaking with the many good reporters who just wanted to do their jobs. Later, a public remark of Katie's came to my attention that told me everything I needed to know, and the campaign should have known. The occasion was a National Press Club event where she spoke to fellow journalists about the patriotic atmosphere following the 9/11 attacks. The whole culture of wearing flags on our lapel and saying "we" when referring to the United States, and even the shock and awe of the initial stages, it was just too jubilant and a little uncomfortable, she said. Unbelievable. I love Philadelphia, its energy, its history. It was also the city where a supporter gave me a very cool t-shirt that said Sarah, which I wore to a rambunctious meet and greet the campaign organized in a Philly bar. But a few people in the city of brotherly love weren't the most loving on that trip. During a motorcade ride, My children looked out the windows of the Suburban and saw people wearing T-shirts that said lovely things like, Sarah Palin is a... starts with a C. Willow was astonished. Mom, did you see that? Don't worry about it, was all I could muster. In Philly, Mark Wallace caught up with the B team because the VP debate between Senator Joe Biden and me was right around the corner. Mark sequestered a small debate prep team in a hotel room with the curtains drawn, blotting out the sunlight. My experience had taught me that you can work well with a diverse team, even people you don't know, if you make the atmosphere upbeat and positive. Whoever was leading this team, though, turned it into a high-pressure penalty box. I understood the stakes. I knew that the McCain ticket was on the ropes and that top campaign staffers were unnerved. I got that, but I had a different perspective than some of the principals on the team as to how we should deal with this reality. We were all wired pretty much the same way, intense and focused, but when things weren't going well, the last thing I wanted to do was sit in a darkened room and hear strange people yelling at one another. Seemed pretty unproductive to me. Finally, after an inconsistent strategy of trying to guess what would be asked in the debate, I thought we all needed some fresh air. As a lifelong runner, I crave breathing in the outdoors and pounding the pavement hard enough to make my thighs hurt and my lungs burn. Coming from the grand, sparkling mountains of the north, I was inspired and energized every time I stepped outside. I repeatedly requested that headquarters carve out some time so I could run. Just half an hour would do. Campaign managers would promise to do so, and once in a while they did write it into the schedule, usually at the exact hour when we were barreling down the freeway in a bus. That day, I didn't care that I was in downtown Philly with protesters lining gray streets, chanting their support for anyone but us under the perpetual shadow of skyscrapers. At this point, I'd take it. I'm glad I wasn't reading my own press at that time. Weeks out, pretty much the entire Washington, New York media constellation was predicting that I'd make a complete fool of myself in the VP debate. Meanwhile, the B team heard that Schmidt and others at headquarters were outraged about the choice of Gwen Ifill as debate moderator. Ifill, a former New York Times correspondent, was in the process of writing what was assumed to be a pro-Obama book. I wasn't worried about it. I was debating Biden, not the moderator. In any case, if Gwen showed any bias, viewers would pick up on it in a heartbeat. It made no sense that the campaign spent so much time firing off talking points and quasi-coordinated strategies for surrogates to make a big deal over something we couldn't control. During debate prep, I had been given stacks of 5x8 index cards bound in rubber bands, and we lugged them around everywhere. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to type them up, which I appreciated. But it was funny because on one side of each card, there was a question, and on the other side, there were a whole bunch of what most people would consider non-answers. Front of card would say, "What is America's role in the world when it comes to global security?" Back of the card, "Senator McCain and I are optimists. We love our country, and John has proven that more than any other leader in America." I didn't need a multiple choice selection of non-answers. All I needed to hear was what John's position was on any particular issue. Then I could either formulate a response that would support it wholeheartedly or carefully articulate my own slightly different perspective. Cindy McCain broached the good idea of moving debate prep to their ranch in Arizona. During debate practice under the Arizona sun, we worked our way through questions for a couple of hours and then took a brief break with the kids down by the creek. Randy had watched all of Biden's debates during the primary, read his autobiography, and studied him. He had the senator's voice down pat, including some of the semi-folksy sayings. As my mom used to say, "God love you, Joe, but you are wrong." Remember, Randy told me, Biden is a truly experienced debater. He's been through 35 years of legislative debates, foreign policy debates, and Supreme Court nominees. He has spent literally decades on the art of political talking. He characterized Biden as someone who definitely liked to hear himself talk, but also made clear that he respected the senator on a number of foreign policy positions, not including, of course, Biden's harebrained idea to divide the nation of Iraq. I too respected Biden's decades of experience, but I also knew him as one of just a handful of members of the U.S. Senate who way back in the 1970s had actually voted against the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, an economic lifeline that would ultimately result in thousands of American jobs, 15 billion barrels of oil pumped into the economy to date, and a huge chunk of domestic energy production. The day before the debate, Ann Coulter was spot on, calling Biden's vote against domestic energy production the equivalent of voting against the invention of the will. The only argument against the pipeline was that it would harm the caribou, an argument that was both trivial and wrong, Ann wrote. The caribou population near the pipeline increased from 5,000 in the 1970s to 32,000 by 2002. It would have been bad enough to vote against the pipeline bill, even if it had hurt the caribou. A sane person would still say, "Our enemies have us in a vice grip. Sorry, caribou, you've got to take one for the team." Over the years, I had occasionally listened to Biden's discussions of energy and realized he had not changed. He still seemed opposed to sensible innovations, from clean coal to nuclear energy to responsible new directional drilling techniques in places like ANWR. On one issue after another, Obama's VP choice was loaded with government experience, but still seemed to have no understanding of logical steps we could take to capitalize on American energy resources. During prep, we spent a lot of time on foreign policy and national security issues involving Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and various aspects of the war on terrorism. We knew the press would portray these as Biden's strengths, and they were strengths thanks to his 35 years of foreign policy experience. During rehearsals, I accidentally called Randy Senator O'Biden, a slip-of-the-lip combination of Obama and Biden. The blunder struck too often, even tripping up campaign staffers. Jay Leno later made the same slip on his new talk show, so we were in good company. We laughed about it, but knew that if I said it even once during the debate, it would be disastrous. Then somebody said, "You ought to just call him Joe." "Oh, I can't just call him Joe," I said. Senator Biden was a senior statesman. He'd been sitting in a U.S. Senate seat since I was 9 years old. I believed calling him by his first name without his permission would be disrespectful. Randy seemed to read my thoughts and offered a solution. "In every debate, you cross the stage and shake hands with your opponent," he said. "When you shake hands, just ask him for permission to call him Joe. He's certainly going to say yes because he's a gentleman." So that's what we decided I would do. We had no idea my mic would already be hot when I walked on stage, crossed over to his turf, and said, "Can I call you Joe?" The expert post-debate analysis was that my question was a cleverly devised strategy to disarm my opponent. Yeah, right. At the ranch, things got more serious when we started the first of 2 formal practice debates, indoors, cameras rolling, under the lights, and each a fully timed 90 minutes long. The first session was intense. No breaks, no commentary or suggestions on refining answers. Just back and forth with Randy playing his attack dog Biden role so convincingly that I wanted to reach over and clobber him for his baiting and twisting of my words and record. When the 90 minutes ended, there was a pause. And then the room burst into spontaneous applause. That took me aback. I'd been so focused on the battle that I really wasn't paying attention to whether or not the McCain team thought I was doing well. But it felt fine to know they all thought so, especially after the gloom and friction of the Philadelphia trials. During the rest of our time at the ranch, debate prep went well because Randy and Steve Began basically took over. When we finished, the kids' babysitter, Penny Stilstra, helped pack up the car seats and the bright pink bumbo chair that Trigg learned to sit up in during the Arizona stay. Then the kids and Todd and I all headed in different directions that would ultimately converge in St. Louis. We'd come full circle with Penny. She was the meticulous and trustworthy babysitter I'd relied on nearly 2 decades earlier when I worked as a proofreader at the Frontiersman when Track and Bristol were tiny. We were thankful she was back in this chapter of our lives for our little ones. We left the ranch and hummed down the road toward the airport and the jet that would whisk us off to the face-off with Biden. My cell phone rang, and when I answered, my heart leaped. It was Track, finally! We talked for a few minutes from wherever he was in Iraq. He wouldn't tell me exactly, and I was so thankful for the providential timing of his call. Now, of all times, when I had just a few uninterrupted minutes, what would be the only quiet moments for many days to come. That he called at just that time from half a world away was, to me, a miracle. I told him I was headed to a debate. "Yeah, I heard something about that on the news," Track said. "Did you study?" I laughed. Talk about a mother-son role reversal. "I did," I said. "I'll be praying for you." Another role reversal, the same words I'd said to my son so many times over the years. It was a right back at you, Mom moment. "You're gonna do great," he said. "I love you. I love you so much, son." I hung up the phone, and a peace settled over my heart. For me, no matter what happened in the debate, I could keep it in perspective. My son called from Iraq. He is safe. Life is good. We touched down in St. Louis, piled into vans, and headed straight for the debate venue at Washington University. From the second we arrived, I felt carried along on a wave of technicians, directors, and producers. We went straight into what they call a technical walkthrough, and a series of people were introduced to me: stage manager, lighting manager, production manager, mic guy, podium height guy, get the shine off your nose guy. The debate commission had assigned a poised and serene woman to escort me to my toe mark, the spot just off stage where I could wait to be introduced before emerging from behind the curtain. As she led us down a hallway, she calmly reeled off times in hours, minutes, and seconds, speaking to debate producers through a mic and earpiece she was wearing. When we had nearly reached the stage, she turned to Jason and said, "I did the same job you're doing for Geraldine Ferraro in 1984. Wow, I thought, what an amazing piece of American history, that there had been only 2 women in debates at this level of national politics, and the same dedicated woman had worked behind the scenes to help shatter the proverbial glass ceiling both times, on both sides of the aisle. I admired Geraldine Ferraro's accomplishments. During the campaign, I sometimes spoke about her contribution to the advancement of women in public service. Shortly after one of those acknowledgments, Ferraro called me on the campaign bus, and we had a nice conversation. What struck me most was that she had said my shout-out to her was the first time in all those years that she had been so publicly acknowledged for her historic step for the United States and for women. I don't believe in voting according to gender or color of skin, but Ferraro's vision and efforts helped a lot of women reach higher than they'd reached before. Jason Recker and I hit my toe mark precisely on time. On the other side of the stage, Biden was supposed to hit his at the same moment, but when I looked across, his spot was empty. Seconds ticked by, an eternity in a tightly scripted television production schedule. Still no Joe. Dang, I thought, he's still running on Senate time. An aide poked his head into the empty space where the senator was supposed to be, swiveled his head, and withdrew. Looking back, it could have been backstage chaos causing the delay, or it could have been a strategy, sort of like icing the kicker just before a field goal. Finally, Biden appeared, as usual looking impeccable in his dark suit, tall and confident, his distinguished silver hair flawlessly groomed. I had never met him before, but now I tried to catch his eye to give him, a friendly nod, a thumbs up, something to acknowledge that, hey, ultimately, we're all on the same team. Go USA! But Senator Biden didn't make eye contact. Instead, he looked past me. His features then hardened into what can only be described as a game face. I could respect that. I knew what it was like to get into a zone before a big game. Then the senator started to stretch. Literally. He put his hands on his hips and, staring grimly at some point behind me, began to bend at the waist, bouncing first to the right, then to the left. Then the neck rolls started, presumably to get rid of all that nasty tension from being the front runner. After that, the senator from Delaware began stretching his quads, grabbing his dress shoe and pulling it up behind his designer-suited rear end, right leg, then left. I'm thinking, okay, didn't know this was going to get physical. I looked at Jason to mouth, what the heck, should I be doing that too? But Jason was looking at his watch, counting down to go time. He didn't tell me then, but his plan was to push me out 5 seconds early so that I could cross more than half the stage and meet Biden symbolically on his turf. Seconds later, Jason gave me a gentle nudge. Go, he said, and remember, think hair plugs. I hustled out on stage, where I shook hands with Senator Biden and asked, "Hey, can I call you Joe?" The debate went well, from my perspective anyway. It was a relaxed and comfortable atmosphere, and the time zipped by much too quickly. Gwen was fine as moderator. I wrapped it up by stating that I had always been proud to be an American, and closed with a quote from Ronald Reagan, who once said that freedom is always just one generation away from extinction. He said, "We don't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. We have to fight for it and protect it and then hand it to them so that they shall do the same. Or we're going to find ourselves spending our sunset years telling our children and our children's children about a time in America back in the day when men and women were free." That's what I wanted Americans to remember. We kicked off the next morning with a lot of prep for the day's events, including an on-camera interview atop the hotel with Fox News reporter Carl Cameron, with the St. Louis Gateway Arch framed in the shot behind me. Among his other questions, he asked what I thought about the campaign pulling out of Michigan. "Yes, I read that this morning," I answered, then said I wish we weren't pulling out of Michigan, that every single person and every single vote mattered, and I sure didn't want anyone to give up anywhere. No harm giving a little shout out to the Great Lakes state, I thought. No one had mentioned to the VP staff or me that the campaign was even considering pulling out of Michigan, much less that we already had. So when I was asked about it, I was caught a bit off guard, but I answered truthfully about having read about it in the newspaper. We moved on to the next question and wrapped up the interview. No big deal. But we soon heard that back at headquarters, it was a big deal. The word came hurtling down that I had been off script with Cameron. Of course, it's pretty easy to issue candid off-script messages when there is no script to begin with. It wasn't the end of the world, though, and I hoped headquarters would forgive me and move on. They didn't. One or more McCain senior staffers would later anonymously tell reporters that I was going rogue. The VP team had been scheduled to do another event in Michigan, but it was canceled, disappointing a lot of us who had appreciated that September 17th town hall meeting with John. Still, we understood that funding was limited, so I suggested to the VP staff that the next time we had an official event near Michigan, we pass the hat for gas money and just do a quick trip across the border to snap one of the off-the-record photos at a cafe or gas station, maybe hold a quick grassroots rally. I thought we would send a positive message to the state that way, show the people that our campaign really did care about their votes. It would be fast, it would be free, it would be mavericky. What was the worst that could happen? We'd maybe get a few more votes? Headquarters said no. With the strange pushback we were getting by then, we were tempted to just sneak across the border. More than once, Nicole had summarized the campaign organization well when, during chaotic moments, she turned to the B team and said with a resigned smile, "Welcome to the pirate ship." But we didn't want our throats cut, so we dropped the road trip idea and tried to find a copy of the script so we could stay on it. The Democrats had quite a bit of extra positive media coverage, thanks to the various celebrities appearing at their events, and the steady stream of liberal stars beating a path to Obama's door had the B team asking why we weren't doing the same with the common-sense conservative celebrities who had offered to help our ticket. There were plenty who sent us word that they would do so. I don't subscribe to the idea that celebrity endorsements are necessarily weighty or significant to public policy, but neither do I think politicians can ignore the influence of popular culture in the age of the instant image and streaming soundbite. Staff started working the phones, and within a few hours we had a number of events lined up with some courageous, independent-minded actors, musicians, and athletes. Kid Rock, for instance, is very pro-America and has common-sense ideas. We heard he was going to come out and do a rally with us, but headquarters said he could participate only in a McCain rally, so that never materialized. Still, the kids were happy. They got to talk to him on the phone. We very much appreciated Robert Duvall and his wife helping at our events, and John Voight blew us away with his articulate and passionate reasoning for the real change America needs. Actress Janine Turner was an eloquent supporter, particularly on the subject of women in politics and the strength and value of single moms who are committed to raising solid citizens. We also welcomed redneck woman Gretchen Wilson aboard the campaign plane. We knew all her songs, and I loved that she loved to talk about her daughter. Along with other patriots, Hank Williams Jr., John Rich, Naomi Judd, and Lee Greenwood joined us on the trail. When Lee jumped on stage with us the first time, Chris Perry, who would wrestle a grizzly bear if it got too close to one of her kids or her blackberry, just about melted when she heard him sing his famous song, Proud to Be an American. We all choked up. Mike Ditka, Brady Quinn, Aaron Tippin, the Bellamy brothers, and so many others joined us on the trail at different points. And some fundraisers would attract big names, supporters not as visible to the national media, but wildly appreciated by us. The Orange County Choppers guys were outrageously bold, which is why people love them. They roared up to a Media, Pennsylvania rally on a hot, custom-made bike that they honed to honor POW and MIA vets. Senators Lieberman, Lindsey Graham, and Arlen Specter were on stage when John highlighted the rally with his promise that Sarah and I are going to get on that chopper and ride it right to Washington and raise hell when we get there. After the event, I looked at the bike, then the campaign bus, then back at the bike. It was so tempting. What do you think headquarters would have said to that? 7 months later, Orange County Chopper founder and Vietnam vet Paul Tuttle Sr. and his sons, all tattooed up and looking good, visited Alaska to honor our state's 50th anniversary. I invited them to come back and we'd go ride together on snow machines. Meanwhile, other people called. I talked to Bono and John's friend Warren Beatty. These were interested folks with good intentions who wanted to share ideas and insights, and I was happy to hear from them. One morning, I was showering when my assistant, Bexy, knocked on the door. "Rick Warren's on the phone again," she called out. "He's been trying to track you down and has called twice." She handed me the phone in the shower, and I turned off the water so it wouldn't be so obvious where I was standing. The well-known author and pastor shared some encouraging words, then offered to pray right then for strength during the campaign. I said, "Absolutely, pray away." I would never turn down prayer, even with limited hours in a campaign day, standing in a few inches of water with a shower curtain for a wardrobe. You do what you gotta do. Without a doubt, though, the real stars of the campaign were the people who contacted us along the trail to encourage McCain and those who packed the rallies, everyday, hard-working Americans. Bexy, Jeannie, and other staffers would collect notes from supporters on the rope lines, and it was an absolute joy, sometimes heartbreaking, always heartwarming to read them. On the plane, I'd read them one by one, parents sending pictures of their precious children, prayer warriors writing to say they were interceding for us, and, so tragically, a Blue Star mom writing to tell me she had become a Gold Star mom. I read those notes and kept them with me. They inspired me, helping to strip away all the sound bites and the slick, orchestrated political theater, and reminded me whom we were fighting for. Sometimes supporters would jot their email address, and I could stop right then and tap them a note. There are some families that Todd and I still keep in contact with, like Charlie Walling, a very confident and handsome young man who had scored an extra chromosome too. We met him in Florida, and he asked me not to call him darling because that wasn't tough. And Joshua Wold, another precious child we met in Minnesota. Todd has his picture on his cell phone. Josh snow machines with his dad. The providential appointments we experienced on the trail were many, and they kept us going with good attitudes and the right perspective. In late September, Todd and Cindy McCain traveled to Los Angeles for a campaign event. Todd enjoyed meeting comedian and radio host Dennis Miller there, along with actors Gary Sinise, Kelsey Grammer, and John Ratzenberger. Another special guy Todd met was a young war veteran who was wearing his buddy's memorial bracelet. "My friend was killed in action 4 years ago, and I haven't taken off this bracelet since," the combat veteran said. He slipped the C-shaped metal band off his wrist and handed it to Todd. "But now I want you to give it to your wife." When Todd returned to Arizona and handed me the bracelet, it was an overwhelming moment. I put this precious memento on and wore it for the rest of the campaign. Not long after that, we hit Orange County, California for another rally, and I heard a voice behind me in the crowd calling out, "That's my bracelet! That's my bracelet!" I turned around to see a fit, dark-haired young man waving furiously a few rows up in the bleachers. After the rally, I hustled over to meet him and thank him. We still have his buddy's memorial bracelet, a cherished reminder of things that really matter. All of those elements, the stickers and signs, the proud parents, the enthused, curious, attentive folks showing up at events by the thousands, suggested an idea. In addition to meeting with movers and shakers in towns along the trail and doing obligatory FaceTime with big money donors who were going to vote for John anyway, why couldn't we focus more attention on the everyday folks who attended our rallies? This occurred to us after the umpteenth time we rolled into a town on the campaign bus to pick up a group of supporters who were already solidly in John's camp. We'd spend hours chatting with them and posing for pictures. Okay, now I want one with you, Sarah. Pretend like we're talking. Now I want one with Trig. Okay, now you and Trig. Now, Todd, you get out of this one. Okay, Piper, you next. Here's my cell phone. Could you call my mother? I enjoyed these friends of the campaign immensely, and I know how important donors are. I sincerely appreciated every one of them. But with such a short timeline, and as we were trailing in the polls, I thought instead of putting me on a bus with 10 friends of John for hours, put me with 10 friends of nobody in particular, and I'll sit with them and convince them to vote for John.